They called her the rookie who cried wolf. At 26 years old, Irene Davis had the best flight scores in her squadron, but nobody listened when she spoke. For 8 months, she watched from the sidelines while others flew combat missions she'd trained years to execute. Then came the day 387 Marines were surrounded, ammunition depleted, with enemy forces closing in from all sides. Command declared the rescue impossible. The terrain was a death trap. The window had closed. But Irene saw something on the radar that everyone else had missed. And she made a choice that would either save hundreds of lives or end her career forever. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Sentinel smelled of coffee, sweat, and the particular tension that came before dangerous missions. Irene Davis sat in the third row, her flight manual open, her pen tracing notes in margins already crowded with observations nobody had asked for. She'd been stationed here on the Croatian border for 8 months, and every briefing felt the same. The senior pilots would discuss tactics and weather patterns, while she documented everything, preparing for missions she was never assigned to fly. At 26, Irene had logged more simulator hours than most pilots twice her age, had studied combat scenarios that hadn't even been declassified yet, and could execute emergency maneuvers that made veteran instructors nervous. But when it came to actual combat operations, she was always grounded. "Today's operation is designated Crimson Shield," announced Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, his voice cutting through the morning drowsiness. "We've got a Marine battalion conducting sweep operations in the Cordon Valley. Intelligence suggests increased hostile activity in the region. We'll have 2 Apaches providing air support and a Chinook on standby for emergency extraction." Irene's pen stopped moving. She knew the Cordon Valley intimately, had spent weeks analyzing its topography, weather patterns, and tactical vulnerabilities. The valley was a geographical nightmare, surrounded by mountains that created unpredictable wind shears and communication dead zones. If something went wrong there, response time would be critical. "Harrison, your lead on the Apaches. Reeves, you're his wingman. Taylor, you've got the Chinook on standby." Irene waited for her name, though she already knew it wouldn't come. Sure enough, Barnes moved on without acknowledging her presence. "Davis," he finally said, almost as an afterthought, "you're on communication relay. Monitor all channels and coordinate with base operations." Communication relay. Again. It was the assignment they gave to pilots they didn't trust with actual aircraft. Irene nodded curtly, her jaw tight enough to ache. Around her, the selected pilots exchanged satisfied glances. Harrison, a veteran with 12 years of combat experience, caught her eye and offered what might have been a sympathetic look. But sympathy didn't put her in a cockpit. As the briefing dispersed, Irene overheard the conversation that had become painfully familiar over the past 8 months. "Command's playing it safe, keeping Davis grounded. She's got the technical skills, I'll give her that. But this isn't a simulator. When bullets start flying, I want someone with combat instincts, not textbook knowledge." "She's young," Harrison replied, though his tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a defense. "Give her time. Maybe in another year or 2 she'll be ready for the real operations." Another year or 2. Irene pretended to study her notes, but the words burned. She'd been hearing variations of this since she arrived. Too young, too inexperienced, too emotional. That last criticism stung the most, because there was a grain of truth to it. Irene wore her heart openly, her passion for flying evident in everything she did. But in a military culture that valued stoic composure, her emotional honesty was viewed as a liability. The worst part was understanding their reasoning. Combat aviation wasn't about flying skills alone. It required split-second decisions under pressure, the ability to remain calm when lives hung in the balance, the experience to navigate situations that no training manual could fully prepare you for. Irene possessed the technical excellence, but she'd never been given the opportunity to prove she had the rest. She walked to the communications center, a cramped room filled with radio equipment and satellite monitors. Her assigned role for the day? Listening to other people fly missions while she tracked their positions on a screen. The Marine Battalion, call sign Warhorse Actual, had deployed at 0600 hours. Irene pulled up their GPS coordinates and overlaid them on the topographical map she'd been studying for weeks. They were moving through the northern section of the Cordon Valley, exactly where she'd identified potential vulnerabilities in her reports. Reports that she'd submitted to command and that had been politely filed away without serious consideration. The morning progressed with routine check-ins. Warhorse Actual reported steady progress. Harrison and Reeves maintained their overwatch positions. The Chinook pilot, Taylor, waited at the forward staging area. Everything was proceeding according to plan. But Irene couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She pulled up the satellite weather data, comparing current conditions with the predictive models she'd been tracking. There was a pressure system developing faster than forecasted, moving toward the valley from the east. Nothing dramatic yet, but the atmospheric conditions were creating the exact scenario she'd warned about in her analysis. The kind of situation that could turn a routine operation into a crisis. She keyed her microphone. Base operations, this is communication relay. I'm seeing unusual weather development in Sector 7. Recommend we advise Warhorse Actual to expedite their timeline. There was a pause before the response came. Copy that, relay. We're monitoring the situation. Current conditions are within acceptable parameters. Within acceptable parameters. The phrase was technically accurate but missed the larger picture. Irene had learned that pointing out what others had overlooked was often interpreted as questioning their competence. So she documented her observation, noted the timestamp, and returned to monitoring. By noon, the pressure system had intensified. Irene watched the satellite imagery with growing concern as cloud formations developed in patterns that matched the worst-case scenarios she'd modeled. The valley was about to become a tactical nightmare, and nobody seemed to recognize it yet. She tried again. Base operations, weather conditions in the valley are deteriorating faster than predicted. Warhorse Actual should consider early extraction. Relay, we have meteorological specialists monitoring this. Your job is communication coordination, not weather analysis. The rebuke was gentle but clear. Stay in your lane. Do your assigned job. Let the experts handle their areas of responsibility. Irene stared at the screens, watching as the Marines continued their sweep operation, moving deeper into the valley while the weather system closed in behind them. Everything in her training, everything she'd learned through months of obsessive study, told her this situation was about to go catastrophically wrong. But nobody was listening to the grounded pilot who'd never flown a combat mission. The first distress call came at 13:47 hours, and it shattered the routine calm of the forward operating base like a grenade. All stations, this is Warhorse Actual. We are under heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate air support. I repeat, we need air support now. Irene's hands flew across the console, pulling up the battalion's position while simultaneously opening channels to the Apache pilots. The communications center exploded into controlled chaos as multiple voices tried to coordinate a response. Warhorse Actual, this is Sentinel Base. What's your situation? The response came through bursts of gunfire and shouting. We're pinned down in a box canyon. Grid reference 7349er. Enemy forces have high ground on 3 sides. We've got casualties, and we're taking sustained fire. The weather just turned to hell. Visibility is near zero. Irene's stomach dropped. She pulled up the topographical map, her worst fears confirmed. The Marines had been pushed into a natural kill zone, exactly the scenario she'd been worried about. The weather system she'd been tracking had moved faster than anyone anticipated, creating the perfect conditions for an ambush. Harrison, Reeves, get to that position now.
Barnes ordered over the command channel. "Sir, we're trying," Harrison's voice came back, strained with frustration. "The weather's created a cloud ceiling at about 800 feet. The mountains around that canyon rise to 2,000. We can't get visual, and our targeting systems can't lock through this soup." Irene was already running calculations in her head, pulling up weather data, wind speeds, cloud patterns. There was a narrow window, a brief gap in the cloud cover that was shifting toward the valley, but it was closing fast, and it wasn't anywhere near Harrison's current position. "Base operations, this is Harrison. We're circling the perimeter, but we can't engage without visual confirmation. Too much risk of friendly fire in these conditions." "Warhorse Actual, can you mark your position with smoke?" Barnes asked. Negative. Wind speeds are too high. Smoke won't hold in these conditions, and we'd just be giving away our position for no tactical advantage." Irene watched the data streams, her mind processing multiple variables simultaneously. The cloud gap she'd identified was still there, still theoretically navigable, but it was shifting fast. In another 10 minutes, it would be gone completely, and the valley would be socked in for hours. "Sir," Irene tried again, keeping her voice level despite the urgency pounding through her veins. "The southeast approach is still viable. I can walk someone through the navigation if—" "Davis, you're relieved from communication duty. Report to my office immediately." Irene stared at the radio in disbelief. They were removing her from communication because she kept pointing out a solution they didn't want to hear. She looked at the screen showing the Marine's position, at the weather data, at the rapidly closing window of opportunity. "Sir, with respect, I think I should remain at—" "That's an order, Specialist Davis, now!" Irene stood slowly, her eyes never leaving the monitors. Another specialist took her seat, someone who would dutifully monitor the channels without offering unwanted analysis or inconvenient solutions. As she walked out of the communication center, she heard Warhorse Actual's voice one more time, stripped of military formality, just raw human desperation. "Anyone who can hear this, we need help now. We've got men dying here. Please, we need someone." Irene stood in the hallway between the communication center and the command offices, her hands clenched into fists. She'd spent 8 months preparing for exactly this kind of situation. 8 months studying that valley, those mountains, those weather patterns. 8 months being told she wasn't ready, wasn't experienced enough, wasn't qualified to have her analysis taken seriously. And now 387 Marines were going to die because nobody would listen to the emotional young pilot who'd never flown a combat mission. She looked back at the communication center, then towards Barnes' office where she'd been ordered to report. Then she looked towards the flight line, where an Apache sat fueled and ready, technically available for backup deployment, but currently unstaffed because every pilot was either already airborne or monitoring the situation from base operations. Irene had a choice to make, and she had about 5 minutes to make it before the weather window closed forever. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative.
The flight line was quieter than usual. Most of the ground crew focused on monitoring the crisis unfolding in the valley. Irene moved with purpose toward the Apache helicopter designated as backup reserve, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She knew exactly what she was about to do. She knew it would end her career. She knew it would violate every regulation in the military handbook. But she also knew that 387 Marines were dying while everyone else debated protocols and worried about approved flight corridors. The crew chief, a seasoned sergeant named Williams, looked up in surprise as she approached. "Davis, what are you doing out here? Thought you were on communications duty." "Change of plans," Irene said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to run a pre-flight check on the backup bird. Command wants to ensure it's ready for immediate deployment if needed." It wasn't technically a lie. Command would want the helicopter ready. She just wasn't mentioning that Command hadn't actually ordered this check, or that she had no authorization to be anywhere near this aircraft. Williams nodded, accepting the explanation without question. "She's fueled and armed. Standard loadout. You need me to stick around?" "No, I've got it. You should probably get to the command center. They might need extra personnel for coordination."
Williams headed off, leaving Irene alone with the helicopter. Her hands moved through the pre-flight check with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over as her mind raced through what came next. She had maybe 10 minutes before someone realized she wasn't in Barnes's office, another 5 before they figured out where she actually was. She climbed into the cockpit, the familiar layout both comforting and terrifying. Every switch, every gauge, every control was exactly where she'd practiced finding them in countless simulator hours. But this wasn't a simulator, and the stakes were 387 lives that Command had essentially written off. Irene pulled on her helmet and activated the communication system. She could hear the ongoing chatter, Harrison and Reeves still circling uselessly above the cloud cover. Warhorse Actual's updates growing more desperate with each transmission. Warhorse Actual, this is Base Stanay. Engineering is working on alternate extraction plans. Hold your position. Base, we don't have time for alternate plans. We need air support or extraction in the next 15 minutes where there won't be anyone left to extract. 15 minutes. Irene looked at the chronometer on her display. The weather window she'd identified would close in approximately 12 minutes. After that, the valley would be completely socked in for at least 6 hours. She began the startup sequence, her hands moving across the controls with deliberate precision. The turbines whined to life, the familiar vibration of power running through the aircraft's frame. This was the point of no return. Once those rotors started turning, everyone would know what she was doing. Apache 2, this is base operations. Why are you powering up? Who authorized that startup? Base, this is Davis. I'm taking Apache 2 to provide support for Warhorse Actual. I have a viable approach vector through the southeast corridor. The radio exploded with responses, multiple voices talking over each other. She heard Harrison's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with authority and barely contained fury. Davis, you are ordered to shut down that aircraft immediately. You are not authorized for this mission. You are not cleared for combat operations. Shut down now. That's a direct order. Sir, with respect, I'm the only pilot who studied that approach corridor extensively. I can navigate it in these conditions. Those Marines need help now, not in 6 hours. Davis, if you take off without authorization, you will face court-martial. Your career will be over. Shut down the aircraft. Irene's hand hovered over the collective. This was it, the moment where she chose between following orders and following her conscience, between protecting her career and protecting 387 lives. She thought about all the times she'd been told to wait her turn, to be patient, to prove herself worthy of trust. She thought about sitting in briefing rooms, taking notes on missions she'd never fly. She thought about the voice on the radio, raw with desperation, begging for help that wasn't coming. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. "I can't shut down. Those Marines need someone, and right now, I'm the only someone who can reach them." She pulled the collective, and the Apache lifted off the tarmac. Behind her, she could hear alarms sounding, people shouting, the entire base erupting into chaos. But ahead of her was the valley, the mountains, and 387 people who were running out of time. Barnes's voice came through her headset one last time, cold with finality. "Davis, when you return to this base, you will be placed under arrest. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir. I understand." "Then God help you if you fail." Irene adjusted her heading toward the southeast corridor, toward the narrow gap in the weather that was closing with every passing second. God help those Marines if I don't try.
The mountains rose before her like ancient sentinels guarding secrets they'd held for millennia. Irene pushed the Apache toward the Dalmatian Pass, her eyes moving constantly between the instrument panel and the rapidly deteriorating visibility outside her canopy. The approach corridor she'd studied for months was now a gauntlet of swirling clouds and unpredictable wind shears. The mountains created their own weather systems here, air currents colliding and creating turbulence that could tear an aircraft apart if the pilot didn't anticipate and compensate for every shift. But Irene had anticipated. She'd spent countless hours studying weather patterns in this region, had modeled how the mountains affected airflow in different conditions. What looked like chaos to others was a pattern she'd learned to read. All units, be advised Apache 2 is flying an unauthorized mission. Davis, you need to turn back now while you still can. She ignored the command channel and switched to the emergency frequency. Warhorse Actual, this is Apache 2. I'm 3 minutes out from your position. I need you to pop green smoke on my mark so I can identify your location. There was a moment of silence, then a voice responded, rough with pain and barely suppressed hope. Apache 2, this is Captain Reeves, Warhorse Actual Commander. Did you say 3 minutes? How are you getting through this weather? Southeast approach through the Dalmatian Pass. I'll be coming in below the cloud ceiling. When I give the word, pop that smoke and get your people ready to move. Roger that, Apache 2. We're ready when you are. The pass narrowed ahead of her, rock walls rising on either side as she descended through the gap in the clouds. Her instruments showed wind speeds that would make most pilots aboard, but she'd calculated for this. The key was using the turbulence, not fighting it, letting the air currents push the helicopter where she needed to go while making constant micro-adjustments. Altitude dropping, 800 feet, 700 feet. The cloud ceiling was just above her now, a gray blanket that turned the world into a claustrophobic tunnel of stone and mist. 600 feet, 500 feet. And then she was through. The valley opened below her, and Irene's stomach clenched at what she saw. The Marine Battalion was pinned in a natural amphitheater of rock, enemy positions dug into the high ground on 3 sides. Muzzle flashes sparked from dozens of firing positions, all aimed down at the Americans trapped below. Warhorse, mark your position now. Green smoke billowed from the center of the Marine defensive position, immediately whipped sideways by the wind but visible enough for Irene to lock on to the coordinates. I have visual on your smoke. Danger close fire support coming in 60 seconds. Keep your heads down. Irene brought the Apache into a tight orbit above the valley, her targeting systems coming alive as she identified hostile positions. The mountains created a shooting gallery, but they also created blind spots, angles where the enemy couldn't effectively return fire against an airborne target. She'd studied those angles. She knew exactly where to position the helicopter to maximize her effectiveness while minimizing her vulnerability. Apache 2, this is Harrison. What the hell are you doing down there? You need to get back above the ceiling before you get yourself killed. Harrison, I'm engaged with hostile forces. Either help me or stay clear, but I'm not leaving until these Marines are safe. She triggered the first burst from the chain gun, the familiar vibration running through the aircraft as 30mm rounds tore into enemy positions on the eastern ridge. The targeting system was working perfectly, her weapons release as precise as any training exercise she'd ever flown. Except, this wasn't training. Those muzzle flashes represented real people trying to kill other real people, and she was now part of that deadly calculus. Irene pushed the thought aside and focused on the mission. Identify, target, engage, move, identify the next threat. The Apache danced through the valley using the terrain for cover, exploiting every angle she'd memorized from topographical maps. Apache 2, this is Hardis. You just gave us breathing room, but we need extraction. We've got 23 wounded, 3 critical. We can't hold this position indefinitely. Irene checked her ammunition stores. She had expended 40% of her ordnance in the initial engagement. She had enough to keep the enemy suppressed for maybe another 10 minutes, but not enough to break the siege entirely. Warhorse, working on extraction now. Stand by. She switched back to the command channel. Base, this is Apache 2. I have successfully engaged hostile forces and provided fire support to Warhorse Actual. Battalion is still trapped and needs immediate extraction. Request Chinook dispatch to my coordinates. Barnes's response was ice. Apache 2, you are flying an unauthorized mission. We will not commit additional assets to support your insubordination. Sir, I have 387 Marines on the ground who need extraction. I can keep the enemy suppressed, but I need that Chinook. The weather conditions make Chinook operations impossible in that valley. The weather conditions are manageable if you use the southeast corridor. I just proved it's possible. There was a long pause. Irene could imagine the debate happening in the command center, officers weighing regulations against reality, protocol against the lives of 387 Marines. Finally, a different voice came through.
Apache 2, this is Taylor. I'm the Chinook pilot. Talk me through that approach corridor.
Irene's hands never stopped moving as she guided Taylor through the navigation points of the Dalmatian Pass, simultaneously maintaining her orbit above the Marine position and engaging any enemy forces that attempted to advance. Sweat ran down her face inside the helmet, her muscles burning from the constant corrections required to keep the Apache stable in the turbulent air. Taylor, you're going to feel a strong crosswind at the third waypoint. Don't overcorrect. Let the aircraft drift east for about 2 seconds, then bring it back on heading. The current will actually help push you through the narrowest section of the pass. Copy that. I'm at waypoint 2 now, starting my descent. Below her, Captain Reeves had organized the Marines into extraction teams, the wounded gathered at the center of their defensive position. The enemy fire had slackened under Irene's continuous suppression, but she could see hostile forces repositioning, trying to find angles that would let them engage without exposing themselves to her weapons. They were running out of time, and her ammunition counter was dropping into the red zone. Warhorse, this is Apache 2. How long until you're wounded or ready for immediate loading? Apache 2, we're ready now, but we're taking intermittent sniper fire from the northern cliff face. Can you suppress that position? Irene swung her targeting system toward the northern cliffs, searching for the sniper nest. There, a natural cave opening about 600 feet up the rock face. Perfect cover, perfect field of fire down into the valley. Taking it out would require precision that pushed her weapon system to its limits. She adjusted her orbit, calculating angles and wind drift. The shot would have to be perfect. She'd get one chance before the sniper relocated. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The rocket leaped from its pod, contrails marking its path through the turbulent air. 2 seconds of flight time that felt like an eternity. Then the warhead detonated inside the cave mouth, the explosion sending rock fragments cascading down the cliff face. Target neutralized. You're clear for extraction. Apache 2, this is Taylor. I'm entering the valley now. Holy hell, you weren't kidding about this turbulence. Stay steady, Taylor. You're doing great. Warhorse, start loading your wounded as soon as the Chinook touches down. We're not going to get a second chance at this. The Chinook emerged from the cloud ceiling like a massive insect, its twin rotors churning the air as Taylor fought to keep it stable. Irene repositioned to provide cover, her remaining ammunition down to critical levels. Enemy forces saw the extraction beginning and launched a desperate assault, attempting to overrun the Marine position before everyone could be evacuated. Irene engaged with everything she had left, her chain gun sweeping across the advancing hostiles. Apache 2, be advised I'm showing your ammunition at 5%. I know my ammunition status base, I'm a little busy right now. The Chinook touched down and Marines began loading the wounded with practiced efficiency, born of desperation. 23 stretchers, moving as fast as possible while still being careful with the injured. Every second felt like an hour. Irene's ammunition counter hit 0 on the chain gun. She still had 3 rockets left, but once those were gone, she'd be defenseless. The Apache would become nothing more than a very expensive observation platform. Taylor, how long until you're loaded? 90 seconds. Make it 60. We've got heavy movement on the eastern ridge. I think they're preparing for a final push. She was right. Enemy forces began advancing in force, taking advantage of her depleted ammunition. Irene used her last 3 rockets strategically, placing them to create barriers of debris and fire that would slow the advance, but not stop it entirely. Apache 2, this is Harrison. Reeves and I are in position above the cloud ceiling. If you can mark targets, we can engage. Irene's heart leaped. The other Apache pilots had been listening to everything, had positioned themselves to help despite not being able to see through the weather. She switched her targeting laser to high intensity, painting enemy positions on the eastern ridge. Harrison, I've got multiple targets marked on the eastern approach, weapons free on anything I'm illuminating. Roger that, engaging now. Rockets screamed down through the clouds, guided by her laser designation. Explosions rippled across the eastern ridge, the enemy advance faltering under the sudden aerial assault. Taylor, get those Marines loaded now. This is our window. Last stretcher going in now, closing ramp. The Chinook's engines roared as Taylor fought for lift in the turbulent air. The overloaded helicopter struggled upward, every foot of altitude hard-won against the mountain winds and the excess weight of 387 Marines, plus their wounded. "Warhorse is airborne," Taylor reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Climbing for the exit corridor." Irene maintained her position, ready to provide cover if the enemy attempted any last-minute interference. But the enemy forces were pulling back, regrouping after the devastating fire support that had shattered their ambush. "Apache 2, this is Captain Reeves. I don't know how to thank you for what you just did. You saved my entire battalion." "Just doing my job, Captain. Now let's get everyone home." Irene turned the Apache toward the exit corridor, following Taylor's lumbering Chinook back through the Dalmatian Pass. Her fuel gauge was reading 20 minutes to reserve, her ammunition completely expended, and her career almost certainly over. But 387 Marines were alive because she refused to accept that impossible was permanent. As she climbed back through the cloud ceiling, Harrison's voice came through her headset, quiet with something that sounded like respect. "Apache 2, that was the most impressive flying I have ever witnessed. You navigated terrain in conditions that should have been impossible, engaged multiple targets with textbook precision, and coordinated a successful extraction against overwhelming odds." "Thank you, Harrison. That means a lot." "It should, because when we land, you're probably going to be arrested."
The forward operating base spread below her as Irene guided the Apache toward the landing pad. She could see the assembled personnel waiting, a formation that included military police vehicles with their lights already flashing. They weren't even pretending this was anything other than what it was. She was about to be arrested for saving 387 lives. "Apache 2, you are cleared for landing on Pad 3. Upon shutdown, you will remain in the aircraft until military police arrive to escort you. Do you understand these instructions?" "Affirmative, base. I understand." Irene brought the helicopter down with the same precision she'd maintained throughout the entire mission. Even now, facing the end of her career, she wouldn't compromise on the fundamentals of good flying. The skids touched concrete with barely a whisper, the smoothest landing she'd ever executed. She began the shutdown sequence, hands moving through each step with deliberate care. Everything by the book, everything documented properly. They'd find no technical faults with her flying, no procedural errors in how she'd handle the aircraft. Her only crime was refusing to let people die while others debated protocols. Through the canopy, she could see Lieutenant Colonel Barnes approaching, flanked by military police. His face was carved from stone, revealing nothing of what he might be thinking. Behind him, she noticed a crowd had gathered, pilots and ground crew and support personnel, all watching to see what would happen to the young pilot who defied orders. Taylor's Chinook had already landed, and she could see Marines streaming out, the wounded being rushed to the medical facility. They were alive. Whatever happened to her next, that fact remained unchanged. The canopy opened, and Barnes stood at the base of the ladder, his eyes hard. "Specialist Davis, step down from the aircraft." Irene unstrapped and descended the ladder, her legs surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline crash that was beginning to set in. She came to attention before Barnes, her shoulders back, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Specialist Davis, you are hereby placed under arrest for disobeying direct orders, unauthorized use of military equipment, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. Military police will escort you to the detention facility where you will await formal charges." "Yes, sir, I understand." The military police moved forward with zip-tie restraints. Irene held out her wrists, accepting the inevitable consequence of her choice. She'd known this was coming from the moment she powered up that Apache. But then, something unexpected happened. Captain Reeves appeared, limping slightly from injuries sustained in the valley, his uniform torn and blood-stained. Behind him came a stream of Marines from Warhorse Battalion, all of them moving to form a line between Irene and the military police. "Sir," Reeves said, his voice carrying across the tarmac, "I request permission to speak." Barnes' expression didn't change. "This is not the time, Colonel." "With respect, sir, I believe it is exactly the time. Specialist Davis saved 387 lives today. My entire battalion would be dead right now if she hadn't acted. Whatever regulation she violated, she did so to achieve the mission that everyone else had declared impossible. The military operates on a chain of command for a reason, Captain. We cannot have junior personnel deciding which orders to follow based on their personal judgment." "Then perhaps," came a new voice, "we need to examine why our chain of command was prepared to write off an entire battalion." A general officer stepped forward from the gathered crowd, stars gleaming on his shoulders. Irene recognized General Patterson, the theater commander who'd been visiting the base for operational reviews. Barnes stiffened to attention. "Sir, this is a matter of discipline and good order." "This is a matter of leadership, Colonel. And from what I observed of the communications traffic, it's a matter of junior personnel recognizing a tactical opportunity that senior leadership failed to identify." Patterson turned his gaze to Irene. "Specialist Davis, what made you believe you could navigate that approach corridor when expert combat pilots considered it impossible?" I chose my words carefully. "Sir, I'd studied that terrain extensively for months. I understood the weather patterns and wind dynamics specific to that region. The approach was difficult and dangerous, but not impossible for a pilot with sufficient preparation and understanding of the local conditions." "And why had you spent months studying terrain and conditions outside your assigned duties as a communications specialist?" "Because I wanted to be ready if I was ever needed, sir. I knew I wasn't being assigned to combat missions, but I wanted to ensure that if an opportunity came, I would be prepared to contribute." Patterson nodded slowly, then turned back to Barnes. "Colonel, I'm countermanding your arrest order. Specialist Davis will be confined to quarters pending a full investigation, but she will not be placed in detention." "Sir, she directly disobeyed. She saved an entire battalion. Yes, she violated protocols. Yes, she disobeyed orders. We'll examine those actions thoroughly, but we'll do so while acknowledging that her initiative and skill achieved a mission success that our standard operating procedures had deemed impossible." Patterson fixed Irene with an intense stare. "Specialist Davis, understand that this investigation will be comprehensive. Your actions today exist in a gray area between heroism and insubordination. The outcome is far from certain." "I understand, sir." "Do you regret your decision?" Irene looked past Patterson to where wounded Marines were being carried into the medical facility, to where Captain Reeves was standing with his battalion, all of them alive because she'd refused to accept that impossible was permanent. "No, sir, I don't regret it."
The investigation lasted 3 weeks, and during that time, Irene became the most controversial figure on the base. Confined to quarters, except for formal interviews and testimony, she watched through her window as opinions about her actions divided the entire military community. Some called her a hero who'd seen what needed to be done and had the courage to do it. Others labeled her a dangerous maverick who'd set a precedent that could undermine military discipline. The debates played out in mess halls and briefing rooms, in official channels and unofficial conversations. The investigation board consisted of 5 senior officers, led by Colonel Hartwell, a decorated combat veteran known for his rigid adherence to protocol. Each day, Irene sat before them answering questions about her decision-making process, her training, her understanding of regulations she'd violated. "Specialist Davis," Hartwell asked during one session, "did you consider the precedent your actions might set? If every junior officer decided they knew better than their commanders, military cohesion would collapse." "Sir, I didn't believe I knew better than my commanders. I believed I had specific knowledge about that terrain and those weather conditions that others lacked. Knowledge I'd acquired through months of dedicated study." "Study that was outside your assigned duties and area of responsibility?" "Yes, sir. But being a good soldier means more than just fulfilling minimum requirements. It means being prepared for whatever the mission demands." Another board member, General Morrison, leaned forward. "Yet you were prepared for a mission you'd never been assigned to and weren't qualified for, according to standard criteria." "I was qualified by skill and knowledge, sir. I lacked only operational experience, which I couldn't gain because I was never given opportunities to prove my capabilities." The sessions were exhausting. Each question designed to probe the boundaries between initiative and insubordination, between heroism and recklessness. Irene answered truthfully, never trying to minimize what she'd done, but also never apologizing for saving lives. Between formal hearings, she received visitors despite her confinement. Captain Reeves came first, bringing a letter signed by every Marine in Warhorse Battalion thanking her for her actions. The signatures covered 6 pages,
each name representing a life that had come home because she'd refused to accept impossible. "Whatever they decide," Reeves told her, "you need to know that you did the right thing. Every man and woman in my battalion knows it. Their families know it. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Taylor, the Chinook pilot who'd followed her navigation guidance through the Dalmatian Pass, came next. "I've been flying for 15 years, he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone handle an aircraft the way you did in those conditions. The military needs pilots like you, Davis. I hope they're smart enough to realize that." Even Harrison and Reeves, the Apache pilots who'd initially dismissed her capabilities, visited. "We were wrong about you," Harrison admitted. "We saw your age and inexperience and assumed that meant you weren't ready. We didn't look deeper to see the preparation and dedication you'd invested." But not all the feedback was positive. Some officers viewed her actions as a direct threat to good order and discipline. They argued that success didn't justify the violation of fundamental military principles. If Davis wasn't punished severely, what would stop other junior personnel from deciding they knew better than their commanders? The debate reached beyond the base. News of the rescue had spread through military channels, then leaked to civilian media. Irene found herself at the center of a national conversation about military culture, gender in combat roles, and the balance between following orders and doing what's right. On the 18th day of investigation, she was called for final testimony. The board had reviewed all evidence, heard from dozens of witnesses, and analyzed every aspect of her unauthorized mission. Hartwell's expression revealed nothing as he began. "Specialist Davis, this board has completed its investigation into your actions. Before we render our findings, do you have any final statement you wish to make?" Irene stood, her voice steady, despite the nervousness churning in her stomach. "Sir, I understand that my actions violated regulations and chain of command. I knew the consequences when I made my decision, and I accept full responsibility. But I would ask this board to consider that military regulations exist to serve a larger purpose, to enable us to protect and defend. When regulations become obstacles to that core mission, when following proper channels means watching fellow soldiers die, then we face an impossible choice. I chose to save lives. I would make the same choice again." Hartwell nodded slowly, exchanging glances with the other board members. "This board recognizes the complexity of the situation you faced. Your technical flying skills are exceptional. Your knowledge of the operational area was comprehensive. Your courage under fire was exemplary. However, your decision to disobey direct orders and conduct an unauthorized combat mission represents a serious breach of military discipline." Irene's heart sank. This was the preamble to punishment, possibly discharge. "Therefore," Hartwell continued, "this board makes the following recommendations. First, all charges of conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline are dismissed. Your actions, while unauthorized, were taken in good faith to accomplish a mission that command had deemed impossible." Irene's eyes widened in surprise. "Second, you will receive a formal reprimand for violation of flight authorization protocols. This reprimand will remain in your permanent record as a reminder that even successful outcomes do not justify bypassing proper channels without extraordinary justification. Third, and here Hartwell's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly, this board recommends your immediate transfer to combat aviation operations with full pilot status. It further recommends you receive commendation for valor in successfully conducting a rescue mission under extreme conditions that resulted in saving 387 lives." The room seemed to tilt. Irene gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "Sir, I don't understand." General Morrison smiled. "Specialist Davis, you proved that you have exceptional capabilities. You also proved that keeping you in a role that doesn't utilize those capabilities is a disservice to both you and the military. We're reassigning you to where you belong, in a cockpit, flying combat missions, with appropriate supervision initially, of course."
The transfer to combat aviation operations came with conditions. Irene would fly, but for the first 3 months she'd do so under the direct supervision of senior pilots who would evaluate every aspect of her performance. One mistake, one sign that her unauthorized mission had been luck rather than skill, and she'd be grounded permanently. She accepted the terms without hesitation. This was the opportunity she'd been preparing for, training for, hoping for, throughout 8 months of being overlooked and dismissed. The only difference was that now, everyone would be watching to see if she was truly as capable as her rescue of Warhorse Battalion suggested. Her first supervised mission came 4 days after the investigation concluded. Harrison was assigned as her instructor pilot, occupying the front seat of the Apache while Irene flew from the back. The role reversal wasn't lost on either of them. Harrison, who'd once questioned whether she was ready for combat operations, was now responsible for certifying that she was. The mission was routine reconnaissance, nothing that would test her limits, but everything that would reveal her fundamental competence. As they lifted off, Harrison's voice came through the intercom. "Davis, I'm going to be honest with you. Half the command staff thinks you got lucky with that rescue. They believe you took an insane risk that happened to work out and that you'll fail when faced with a situation you haven't specifically prepared for. I need to know if they're right." "They're not, sir. I didn't get lucky. I was prepared." "Then show me. Fly this mission like every other mission you'll fly from now on. By the book, but with the skill and judgment that made you believe you could navigate the Dalmatian Pass." Irene settled into the rhythm of flight, her hands and feet working the controls with practiced precision. The Apache responded to her inputs like an extension of her own body, every adjustment smooth and deliberate. She called out checkpoints, maintained proper radio discipline, demonstrated textbook navigation and tactical awareness. But Harrison pushed harder. "Hostile radar contact, 11 o'clock, range 6 miles, react." Without hesitation, Irene banked the Apache toward terrain that would mask them from the radar, dropping altitude to use the mountains as cover while maintaining their heading toward the objective. Harrison said nothing, but she felt him evaluating every decision. "Engine temperature rising in the number 2 turbine. What's your response?" Irene scanned the gauges, identified the problem as a sensor malfunction rather than actual mechanical failure, and calmly reported the diagnosis. "Number 2 temperature sensor showing erratic readings, but oil pressure and vibration are normal. Actual engine temperature is within parameters. Recommend continued operation with close monitoring." "Correct. How did you determine it was a sensor issue so quickly?" "The temperature spike was too rapid and didn't correlate with any other engine parameters. Real turbine problems show warning signs across multiple systems." The mission continued for 2 hours, Harrison throwing scenario after scenario at her. Each time, Irene responded with the competence she'd been developing for years, the skills she'd honed in simulators and training exercises while waiting for someone to give her a chance to prove herself in actual operations. When they finally returned to base, Harrison was silent during the post-flight inspection. Only after they'd completed all shutdown procedures did he finally speak. "Davis, I owe you an apology, not just for doubting you before, but for assuming your rescue mission was a one-time burst of courage rather than the product of genuine capability. You're not just a good pilot, you're an exceptional one." "Thank you, sir. That means a lot coming from you." "Don't thank me yet. Word about your capabilities is spreading, which means you're going to be given increasingly difficult assignments. Command wants to see what you're really capable of now that they're paying attention." Harrison was right. Over the following weeks, Irene's missions grew progressively more challenging. She flew close air support for ground operations, conducted reconnaissance in contested airspace, and provided emergency extraction for special operations teams. Each mission came with senior pilots evaluating her performance, looking for any sign that her unauthorized rescue had been an aberration. But the scrutiny revealed only what Irene had been trying to prove for 8 months. She was skilled, dedicated, and capable of handling pressure that would break less prepared pilots. The emotional passion that others had viewed as a weakness proved to be a strength, driving her to excel where others might have been satisfied with adequacy. 6 weeks into her probationary period, she was assigned to a particularly dangerous mission. A reconnaissance team had been compromised deep in hostile territory and needed immediate extraction.
The LZ was surrounded by enemy forces, and the approach corridor was under direct fire. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes was coordinating the mission from base operations. When Irene reported for briefing, she saw something different in his expression. Not the dismissive doubt she'd grown accustomed to, but genuine respect mixed with concern. "Davis, this is going to be the most dangerous mission you've flown. The LZ is hot, the enemy knows we're coming, and our window for extraction is less than 3 minutes. I need to know you're ready for this." Irene met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I'm ready. I've trained for exactly this kind of operation." Barnes studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I know you have. That's why you're flying lead on this one. Harrison will be your wingman, but this is your mission. Bring those people home." The words sent electricity through her flesh. Flying lead meant that she wasn't just proving herself anymore. She was being trusted, being given responsibility based on demonstrated competence rather than having to constantly fight for recognition. As she walked toward the flight line, Captain Reeves appeared, now fully recovered from his injuries in the Cordoon Valley. "Heard you're flying a hot extraction today. Wanted to wish you luck, though I don't think you need it. You've got something most pilots don't have, a combination of technical excellence and absolute refusal to quit. That's what saved my battalion, and that's what's going to bring those reconnaissance personnel home today. I hope you're right. I know I'm right. I've seen what you can do when everyone else says something's impossible." Irene climbed into the Apache, her pre-flight check automatic after weeks of intensive operations. Harrison's voice came through the intercom from his own helicopter. "Davis, you've got lead on this one. I'll cover your approach and provide suppressive fire as needed. But the extraction itself, that's all you. Show me what the pilot who saved Warhorse Battalion can do when she's actually authorized to be there." Irene pulled the collective and lifted off, her helicopter rising into the afternoon sky with Harrison following close behind. Ahead lay hostile territory, enemy fire, and a team of soldiers who needed someone skilled enough and brave enough to reach them. Irene smiled inside her helmet. Turned out that someone was her.
The approach to the extraction point took them deep into territory where enemy forces had air defense systems capable of bringing down helicopters. Intelligence had identified 3 potential SAM sites along their route, any one of which could turn their mission into a death sentence. But intelligence had also identified gaps in the coverage, narrow corridors where the overlapping radar zones created blind spots. Irene had spent hours studying those gaps, calculating approach vectors that would minimize their exposure while maintaining the speed necessary for a successful extraction. "All units, be advised you are entering contested airspace. Recommend low-altitude approach using terrain masking." "Copy that, base. We're going in low." Irene dropped the Apache to barely 200 feet above the ground, using hills and valleys to stable in radar coverage. Behind her, Harrison matched her flight profile, trusting her navigation even as they raced through terrain that left zero margin for error. The reconnaissance team's position appeared on her tactical display, a blinking icon surrounded by red markers indicating enemy forces. The team had been compromised during a deep penetration mission and had been running for 18 hours, enemy patrols closing in from multiple directions. "Recon Team Valor, this is Apache Lead. We're 3 minutes from your position. What's your status?" "Apache Lead, this is Valor. We're pinned down in a creek bed, enemy forces less than 500 meters out and closing. We've got 1 wounded, mobile but needs immediate medical attention. LZ is under direct observation by hostiles." Irene processed the information rapidly. A standard extraction would put them in the kill zone for too long. The enemy would have time to bring concentrated fire against the helicopter while it was most vulnerable, on the ground with personnel loading. But there was another option, one she'd practiced extensively but never executed in combat conditions. "Valor, prepare for rope extraction. We're not landing. You're coming up to us." "Copy that, Apache Lead. We're ready for rope extraction." Irene swung wide of the LZ, approaching from an angle the enemy wouldn't expect. She keyed the intercom to Harrison. "I'm going to hover above the creek bed for rope deployment. I need you to suppress enemy positions on the ridgeline while I hold position." "Understood. I've got your back." The creek bed came into view, a narrow slash of vegetation and water cutting through rocky terrain. Irene could see the reconnaissance team, 4 figures in tactical gear pressed against the bank, scanning for threats.
She could also see muzzle flashes from enemy positions on the surrounding ridges. "Valor, mark your position with IR strobe. I'm coming in now." An infrared beacon began flashing below, visible through her night vision systems despite the afternoon sunlight. Irene brought the Apache to barely 200 feet above the ground, the rotor wash creating a whirlwind of debris and spray from the creek bed. Harrison's Apache screamed past, his chain gun raking the enemy positions with suppressive fire. Explosions rippled across the ridgeline as his rockets found targets, buying precious seconds for the extraction. Irene held the helicopter rock steady despite the turbulence from the surrounding terrain and the weight shift as ropes deployed from the external mounting points. Below her, the reconnaissance team began ascending, climbing hand over hand while enemy rounds sparked off nearby rocks. Every second felt like an eternity. The helicopter was a stationary target, its hover position known to every hostile in the area. Irene's hands made constant micro-adjustments to the controls, compensating for wind gusts and the changing weight distribution as the team climbed. "Taking fire from the eastern ridge," Harrison called out. "Engaging Mao." More explosions, more suppressive fire, buying time they desperately needed. Irene watched her fuel gauge dropping, watched the tactical display showing enemy forces converging on their position, watched the reconnaissance team climbing with desperate speed. "First man reaching the cabin," came a voice through the external communications. The helicopter shuddered as the first team member pulled himself into the crew compartment. Then the second. The third was struggling, the wounded team member whose injuries slowed his ascent. "Apache lead, we've got heavy weapons positioning on the western ridge. You need to get out of there now." "Negative, Harrison. We've still got one man on the rope." Enemy tracers began arcing toward her helicopter, bright lines of death crossing the space where she held position. One round punched through the tail section with a metallic clang that Irene felt through the airframe. "We're hit," she reported calmly, checking her instruments for damage assessment. "Still flyable. Come on, Valor, get that last man aboard." The wounded team member was 10 feet from the cabin, his movements slowing from exhaustion and pain. Below him, enemy forces were breaking from cover, making a desperate rush toward the creek bed. Irene couldn't wait any longer. She began ascending slowly, still holding hover, but gaining altitude to pull the wounded man away from the enemy advance. 5 feet, 10 feet. The team member's hand slipped on the rope, and for a heart-stopping moment, it looked like he might fall. But his teammates grabbed him, hauling him bodily into the helicopter as Irene continued her controlled ascent. The moment he was inside, she broke hover and accelerated, the Apache leaping forward as she dove for the terrain corridor that would take them out of the engagement zone. "Valor is secure. All personnel recovered. We're outbound." Harrison fell into formation beside her, his Apache showing damage from enemy fire but still flying strong. Behind them, enemy forces reached the creek bed too late, their target already disappearing into the mountain valleys. The flight back to base took 20 minutes, during which Irene monitored her damaged tail section and maintained constant awareness of the wounded reconnaissance team member being treated in her crew compartment. The damage wasn't critical, but it was a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. As the base came into view, she saw the same assembled crowd that had witnessed her unauthorized takeoff weeks before. But this time, they were gathering to welcome home a successful mission, not to arrest an insubordinate pilot. The Apache touched down with the same gentle precision she always maintained, professional to the last. Medical personnel rushed forward to treat the wounded reconnaissance team member, while the rest of Recon Team Valor climbed out, exhausted but alive. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes approached as Irene completed her post-flight procedures. His expression carried something she'd rarely seen directed at her before: unqualified approval. "Davis, that was textbook execution under extreme conditions. The rope extraction was brilliant, and your ability to hold hover under fire while taking hits was exceptional. You've more than proven yourself worthy of combat aviation operations." "Thank you, sir. Just doing what I was trained to do." "No," Barnes corrected. "You did what you trained yourself to do during all those months when others overlooked your capabilities. The military gave you the basic skills, but you developed them into something exceptional through your own dedication and initiative."
3 months after her unauthorized rescue of Warhorse Battalion, Irene stood in the same briefing room where she'd once been told she was only qualified for communications duty. But everything had changed. The room was packed with pilots and support personnel, and when she entered, conversation died as everyone turned to face her. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes stood at the front, and beside him was General Patterson, the theater commander who'd intervened during her near arrest. On the display behind them was Irene's service photo, but it was labeled differently now: Combat Aviation Operations, Lead Pilot. "Ladies and gentlemen," Barnes began, "we're here today to recognize exceptional service and to discuss changes in our operational protocols based on lessons learned from recent missions." Irene had been told this was a routine briefing, nothing that required special preparation. But as Barnes continued speaking, she realized this was something else entirely. 3 months ago, Specialist Davis violated direct orders and conducted an unauthorized combat mission. At the time, many of us viewed her actions as dangerous insubordination. But her success in rescuing 387 Marines forced us to examine why a logistics specialist was better prepared for that mission than our designated combat pilots. Barnes pulled up data on the display, showing flight hours, training records, and tactical knowledge assessments. Irene's metrics were highlighted, showing months of self-directed preparation that far exceeded what was required for her assigned role. What we discovered was that we had systematically failed to recognize exceptional capability because it didn't fit our preconceptions. We saw a young pilot with limited combat experience and decided she wasn't ready, without ever testing whether that assessment was accurate. General Patterson stepped forward. "This isn't just about Specialist Davis. It's about how we evaluate talent and potential throughout our military structure. How many other soldiers do we have whose capabilities we're not fully utilizing because they don't match our expectations?" The question hung in the air. Irene could see officers and pilots exchanging uncomfortable glances, perhaps thinking about their own assumptions and biases. "Effective immediately," Patterson continued, "we're implementing new protocols for pilot evaluation and assignment. Technical skill, tactical knowledge, and demonstrated initiative will be weighted more heavily than time in service or conventional experience markers. We're also establishing a program to identify soldiers across all specialties who show capabilities beyond their current assignments." Barnes took over again. "Additionally, we're recognizing that sometimes following proper channels results in mission failure. While we cannot and will not endorse routine violation of the chain of command, we are establishing clearer guidelines for when junior personnel should escalate urgent concerns and how senior leadership should respond to those escalations." He paused, his eyes finding Irene in the crowd. "But today is also about recognition. Specialist Davis, front and center." Irene walked forward, her heart pounding. The assembled personnel rose to their feet as she passed, a standing ovation that brought unexpected emotion welling up in her chest. Patterson held a medal case, opening it to reveal a silver star. "Specialist Irene Davis, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. On the afternoon of August 15th, you displayed extraordinary heroism and technical skill in conducting a combat rescue mission under extreme conditions, resulting in the successful extraction of 387 Marines who would otherwise have been lost. Your actions reflect the highest standards of military service and bring great credit upon yourself and the United States military." As Patterson pinned the medal to her uniform, Irene felt the weight of it, both literal and symbolic. This wasn't just recognition for one successful mission, it was validation of every hour she'd spent preparing when others told her preparation wasn't necessary, every time she'd studied when she could have been resting, every moment she'd refused to accept that her capabilities were limited by others' perceptions. The ceremony concluded with Barnes announcing Irene's promotion to officer rank pending completion of required leadership training.
She would no longer be Specialist Davis, but Lieutenant Davis, with all the authority and responsibility that rank entailed. As the crowd dispersed, pilots who'd once dismissed her now approached with congratulations and requests to discuss tactical concepts she'd developed. Harrison asked her to help design new training protocols for mountain aviation. Taylor wanted her input on extraction procedures. Even Reeves, the Apache pilot, who'd questioned whether she was combat-ready, sought her advice on advanced flight maneuvers. But the most meaningful moment came when a young pilot approached, barely out of flight school, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty that Irene recognized all too well. "Lieutenant Davis, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been told I'm too inexperienced for advanced assignments, that I need more time before I'm ready for real responsibility. But watching what you did, how you prepared and proved yourself, it gives me hope that maybe capability matters more than what others assume about you." Irene smiled, seeing her younger self in this pilot's eyes. "It does matter. But here's what I learned. You can't wait for others to recognize your potential. You have to develop it yourself. Prepare yourself. Make yourself ready for opportunities before they appear. Because when the moment comes, when lives depend on someone stepping forward, you need to be the person who's ready. Even if it means going against what you're told to do, it means understanding the difference between rules that ensure safety and mission success and rules that exist because of assumptions and biases. Most of the time, you follow the chain of command, but sometimes, very rarely, you face a choice between following orders and fulfilling the larger mission. That's when you need judgment, courage, and absolute confidence in your preparation." The young pilot nodded, absorbing the advice. As she walked away, Irene saw the same determination she'd felt 8 months ago when she first arrived at this base, overlooked and underestimated. Later that evening, Irene stood at the same spot where she'd watched the sun rise over the mountains on countless mornings, feeling invisible and insignificant. But the sunset before her now painted the sky with colors that seemed brighter, more vivid, as if the world itself had changed. Her radio crackled with routine base communications, flight operations continuing, missions being planned, the constant rhythm of military life. But now, her voice was part of that rhythm, her input valued, her capabilities recognized. Captain Reeves approached, his steps still slightly uneven from his injuries in the Cordoon Valley. "Lieutenant Davis, still sounds strange to say that. Still feels strange to hear it. I wanted to tell you something. The Marines from Warhorse Battalion, we got together and wrote a letter to Congress. We're recommending changes to military policies about pilot assignments and operational authority, using your example as the reason why talent should be recognized regardless of conventional experience metrics." Irene turned to him, surprised. "That's not necessary. I was just doing what needed to be done." "That's exactly why it's necessary. You showed that sometimes the person who needs to act isn't the person everyone expects. That lesson shouldn't be lost just because your story had a happy ending." As Reeves walked away, Irene returned her gaze to the mountains, to the valleys where she'd proven that impossible was just a word people used when they hadn't tried hard enough. Somewhere out there, other soldiers were facing their own moments of being overlooked, dismissed, told they weren't ready. She hoped they would have the courage to prepare anyway, to develop their skills in silence, to be ready when the moment came. Because sometimes the difference between tragedy and triumph was simply whether someone refused to accept that impossible was permanent. Her radio beeped with an incoming assignment, a reconnaissance mission along the same mountain ranges where she'd rescued Warhorse Battalion. Routine patrol, nothing dramatic, but Irene had learned that every mission was an opportunity, every flight a chance to demonstrate that capability mattered more than assumptions. She grabbed her flight gear and headed toward the flight line, ready for whatever came next. After all, being ready was what she did best.
1 year after the Warhorse Battalion rescue, Irene stood on the flight line at dawn, watching new pilots conduct their qualification flights. She'd been promoted to captain and assigned to develop advanced training programs, using lessons learned from her unauthorized mission to reshape how the military prepared pilots for complex operations. The base had changed in subtle ways since that August afternoon when she'd defied orders and flown into the Cordon Valley. New protocols emphasized initiative alongside discipline. Evaluation criteria weighted demonstrated capability more heavily than conventional experience markers. Young pilots were encouraged to develop expertise beyond their assigned specialties. But the most significant changes were harder to quantify. There was a new understanding that talent could be overlooked, that assumptions about readiness often reflected bias rather than reality, that sometimes the person who needed to act wasn't the person everyone expected. Captain Reeves approached, his limp now barely noticeable. He returned to full duty 6 months earlier and had been instrumental in advocating for policy changes inspired by Irene's story. "Morning, Captain Davis. Big day today." "Is it? I thought this was just routine training operations." Reeves smiled. "Check your messages. General Patterson wants to see you at headquarters." Irene pulled out her phone and found the summons waiting for her. No details, just a request for her presence at the Theater Command Center by 0900 hours. The vagueness made her nervous, reminders of her investigation still fresh enough to trigger anxiety. "Any idea what this is about?" she asked. "Above my pay grade, but given that Patterson specifically requested you, I'm guessing it's not bad news." The drive to headquarters took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Irene spent the time mentally reviewing her recent missions, searching for anything that might warrant the theater commander's personal attention. Her performance reviews had been exemplary. Her training programs were being adopted across multiple bases. She couldn't identify any reason for concern. Patterson's aide escorted her to a conference room where she found not just the general, but several senior officers she didn't recognize, their uniforms indicating they'd come from different branches of the military. The setup felt formal, important in ways she couldn't immediately parse. "Captain Davis, thank you for coming," Patterson began. "I want to introduce you to some colleagues who've been following your career with interest." The introductions revealed officers from the Air Force, Navy, and Marines, all involved in combat aviation operations or pilot training. They've been studying the Warhorse Battalion rescue, analyzing what it revealed about talent identification, operational authority, and the balance between following protocols and achieving mission objectives. Your unauthorized mission created significant controversy, but it also provided valuable data about how we evaluate pilot readiness and make tactical decisions under pressure. We've been using your case study to develop new approaches across all service branches. Another officer, a Navy commander, added, "More importantly, your story has inspired changes in how we think about junior personnel and their potential contributions. We've identified dozens of cases where capable individuals were overlooked because they didn't fit conventional profiles." Patterson took over. "Captain Davis, we're establishing a new program focused on identifying and developing exceptional talent regardless of conventional experience metrics. The program will operate across all service branches, working to ensure we don't miss capabilities the way we almost missed yours. We want you to help lead this initiative." Irene felt the weight of what they were proposing. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about creating systemic change that would affect thousands of service members, ensuring that others wouldn't face the obstacles she'd overcome. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm a pilot. I'm not sure I'm qualified to lead a service-wide personnel program." "You're qualified because you lived the problem we're trying to solve. You understand what it means to be overlooked, to have capabilities that others don't recognize, to prepare yourself without external validation. That perspective is exactly what this program needs." The meeting continued for 2 hours, discussing program structure, evaluation criteria, and implementation timelines. Irene would maintain her flight status, but would split her time between operational duties and developing this new talent identification initiative. As the meeting concluded, Patterson pulled her aside. "Captain, 1 year ago you made a choice that could have ended your career. Instead, it transformed not just your own trajectory, but how the military thinks about talent and potential. That's rare. Most people who take risks like yours either fail or succeed quietly. You succeeded in a way that created lasting change. I just did what needed to be done, sir. Exactly. And now we're building systems to ensure that others who do what needs to be done are recognized and supported, rather than overlooked and dismissed. That's your legacy, Davis. Not just saving 387 lives, but changing how we identify and develop the people who'll save lives in the future. Irene drove back to base, thinking about the journey from overlooked logistics specialist to captain, helping reshape military policy. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been fair, but it had been worth it. That afternoon, she flew a training mission with one of the new pilots, a young woman who reminded her of herself a year earlier. As they executed complex maneuvers through the mountain valleys, Irene saw the same hunger to excel, the same determination to prove capability despite being underestimated. "You're doing well," Irene told her over the intercom, "but I can tell you're holding back, being careful not to exceed expectations. Don't do that. Push yourself. Show what you're really capable of." "I don't want to seem arrogant or insubordinate." "You're not being insubordinate. You're being competent. But more than the size of your body, that preparation created opportunity, and that sometimes the person who saved the day was the one everyone said wasn't ready. After all, she'd built a career on proving conventional wisdom wrong. Why stop now?" Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.